Welcome to How to Fire Someone Without Getting Sued, Taylor's version, which is a play on Taylor Swift. I thought it was pretty clever myself. But I am also taking this presentation. I think you've seen our co-founder and CEO, Ali, will typically do this as well. And I wanted to take this topic and revamp it into my own words and break it down in a way that's also digestible and something that might be a little bit more fun, and then also give you a glimpse into our software and why having HR software even matters for the termination process. So here is my excuse to get some more use out of my professional headshots. I am a product marketing manager here at HR for Health, and I'm really passionate about breaking down HR subjects, HR terms, HR jargon, and making it understandable and a little bit more fun on our social media and email marketing, and even for these webinar presentations. I'm typically helping putting together these slide decks for a lot of our colleagues, and I'm really passionate about making this content and employment laws and employee management so much more accessible and so much more friendly to the average person, because I'm really eager and excited to help everyone treat their employees better. And that starts with learning a little bit of HR. And so my role is working with our product team who helps put together our software. I work with them to understand our products even more, and I work with them to create the marketing materials and the everything that comes with marketing in and of itself. So like our emails, our social media, our blog posts, everything. I want to work with our team so that way I can help our audience understand what we're selling and why we're selling it. I create some of the HR for Health guides on our webinars, namely, in case you want to leave a compliment on it, I helped put together the 2025 employment law guide for all of you. I think you've probably seen it all over our social media. So I helped design that ebook and some of the other content that we create here at HR for Health. So please feel free to compliment that, because that did take some time, but I love putting it together, especially because we have the beautiful purple on our branding. And I also have two cats. So I'm going to warn you, one of them likes to scream a lot. So if you hear a screaming cat, it's okay. It's just one of the children. And so today's agenda is the first section. I want to break down some of the HR jargon around employee separations, employee terminations. And then I want to go through just from what we see. So our HR might be a little bit different in the sense that we're focusing on a particular niche, and that is healthcare and dental. So that might be a little bit different than corporate America and whatever they're seeing with terminations. And we notice that it is different for dental and healthcare. And so I want to break down some of those mistakes that we see. And then with all of that education, I really do want to take the time to explain why did we make HR software? Why are we adding to it? I know that you see that there's a lot of other HR softwares out there. Why did we create our product? Why does our product actually help you? And why is it different from the others that you've probably seen out there? If, heaven forbid, you're not using HR for Health, which I will forgive you for, that's fine. We'll talk about it later. If you are using HR for Health, then a lot of this you don't need to worry about. And then I'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A. So step one to not getting sued, let's dive into some of the basic terminology. So there is employment at will. I'm sure you've heard this. Most states in the United States are considered at-will employment states. And that is probably kind of how it sounds, is that the employer, an employee, has the right to leave that establishment or that organization, or in your case, your healthcare or dental practice, at will. But this does not mean that you can just fire someone because you feel like it. You are still adhering to the EEOC, and you have to make sure that you're not discriminating against an employee. You have to follow federal regulations, which could include the Family and Medical Leave Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, or other federal and state employment statutes. So don't get crazy and willy-nilly with that one. But that is a term that you've probably seen out and about if you happen to be Googling, how do I fire my employee? So there's voluntary termination, and there's two different kinds for this. That is resignation, which just means I'm quitting my job. Job abandonment, which means they're not just leaving their job for a day or whatever it might be. Like they literally leave and they don't communicate with anyone that they're not showing up again. And they just completely abandon all of their responsibilities and they don't communicate that they're going to be gone. And involuntary termination, which means that employee is not volunteering. They're not saying, I want to leave my job. There are two different kinds of involuntary termination. So, for cause, which means there is a conduct or policy violation that could be code of conduct. Some of those things are outlined in your employee handbook, or that could be poor performance. And then without cause, which could be medical, a RIF is a reduction in force, or at will. Don't worry with all of these terms, just in case you are super excited about this and trying to write some of it down. I'm going to make sure to send you a copy of this slide deck when I am done today. And you can have all of my notes as well. And then I'm going to include some other free resources. So feel free to play this in the background like a podcast. There are some more terms that you should probably be aware of. So a termination date does matter. This will influence final pay once you have to get to that point with an employee. So make sure that you understand their absolute last day of work, because that does contribute to final pay. And I think I'll touch on it a little bit later, but that really does matter because there's different federal and state level laws that you should be concerned about when it comes to final pay when you've terminated an employee. Termination pay, again, this will include the different federal and state level laws, and then also sick leave policies, whatever else you have with your practice. All of this has to be considered within that termination pay and how you're paying out that employee. So you need to be really, really careful, regardless if you're super compliant, right? Let's say the termination is great, everyone understands. I mean, no one's really excited about getting fired. But that last piece at the end can really hurt you if you aren't paying attention to those final pay laws on a federal and state level. And that can get you into some legal trouble later. So make sure you understand that term and that you're paying attention to all of the little details when you're wrapping up someone's employment. And then a termination meeting. So this can be a termination meeting is where you formally sit down with that employee and you express to them that you are separating from employment with them and that they will no longer be employed by you. Sometimes people will also use this as an opportunity for exit interviews. And if you haven't heard that term before, exit interviews can be incredibly helpful if you feel like that situation warrants it. So with an exit interview, you've probably seen it before where the manager, or if you have worked with formal HR, they'll ask you different questions about your experience at the company, what could have been different. And a lot of these can help you either in the hiring process whenever you want to find an employee to fill that position again in the future, or those exit interviews can even help you as an employer, or when you're trying to manage your other employees, it can help influence some of the decisions that you have to make later on. And it's also helpful just to get that kind of feedback. So you can use those meetings as a formal time and place to communicate what happened, what went well, and what didn't go well, and use that to inform some of your policies and procedures in the future. So I know, super fun to go through all of the key concepts, and I'm not going to give you a pop quiz after this. But you're probably hearing some of this as I was reading it too, and it might sound common sense to an extent, right? Like, but why are people getting sued? Why are people having to find legal representation when it comes to firing an employee? And I assume either this title was just so good and you had to register for this anyways, but I'm assuming that a lot of you have some sort of fear when it comes to firing an employee. And I'm assuming that that fear might come from the words wrongful termination. And wrongful does mean illegal. So it becomes illegal whenever an employee is being fired because they are a member of a protected class or they're exercising a right that the law has given to them. That is when it starts to breach into an illegal territory that can get you or your practice into a lot of trouble. And where this comes into all of the federal and state level laws, let me make sure the screen fits a little bit better. There we go. These are the different categories of protected classes. And this is what the EEOC wants to protect people. And so these protected classes mean This is a specific subset of group of people who have in the past either been a victim to harassment or retaliation or discrimination. And so the law has come in and said, we want to verbally and very specifically name these classes of people out so that way they aren't targeted and so that way they are protected in the future. And so that comes down to the categories of race, color, religion, national origin, sex. So that can include pregnancy, childbirth. We've talked about it with HR for Health if you've seen some of our materials in the past. Any pregnancy discrimination, so the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. That includes age, any disabilities, genetic information, retaliation, should be careful of that one, and interfering or coercing or threats relating to exercising rights from that employee. So on top of federal and state laws, you have all of these different subsets of people that you want to make sure that you are considering when terminating and how that can come across. And if there's any part of you that could be engaging in any of these poor behaviors that are using any of these protected classes as a reason for firing them. And so what could this look like? A lot of this sounds like kind of scary, right? These are all really serious terms to use, and these are all really serious positions to put yourself in and people that you're talking about. And I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't assume, but I'd like to assume that no one's doing this maliciously, right? You're coming from a place of you want to run your practice or your healthcare or dental practice more efficiently, and you're having an employee that's frustrating. Maybe they have shown up chronically late. Maybe they're underperforming. And there's parts of you that really just want to have a better team. But unfortunately, if you're not paying attention to your own biases, these can be blind spots within the firing and termination process. And the other parts of it too, where it's really important to connect with either the practice owner. If you have HR, that's amazing. But you should consider talking this through with another person of authority before you ever even consider crossing that bridge of termination, and talk it through and say, am I seeing this objectively? Or do I have these unconscious biases that are playing in right now that could get us into trouble later on? And so from that last slide of protected classes, what could that actually look like, right? Like, it doesn't have to be something super extreme. That could be firing someone. That's part of a protected class. So if you fire a pregnant employee, if you are retaliating against someone that reported an unsafe workplace condition, retaliation is a lot here. And sometimes you might not recognize what retaliation looks like either. So that's another great time for you to talk this through with another trusted individual and say, like, I'm considering letting go of this employee for this reason. Am I being objective about it? Or maybe you're retaliating. Maybe it's coming from a place of emotions and it's somewhere you can pause first before acting. All of those are retaliation, and then pregnancy discrimination. So some of these, they seem pretty blatant, but a lot of times if you're not paying attention to the process and you haven't talked this through with someone else, like maybe you've just been marinating on it for a while and you're like, I've been wanting to get rid of this employee. Make sure you think about it and talk it through with their manager. If you are the manager, talk it through with the practice owner, someone else. That way you can make sure that you're being as objective as possible when it comes to wanting to terminate an employee. So why do I care to help you with this? And also, why does this matter, right? Like, why even educate yourself on wrongful termination? I am of the generation of being chronically online. And so what that means in my language is that Google's free to me. So as an employee, I have access at all times to all HR information. I have access to Reddit. I can go look up forums. I can go look up TikTok. I can go look up Instagram. And I can start to Google, have I been wrongfully terminated? And I'm really passionate about this particular subject because it is so not worth the risk if you just pause first and make sure that you have all the evidence you need and everything, and you've done everything in your power to make sure that that employee can be set up to be successful. There's just way too much information out there where it's so different than what it was decades ago, where you could probably get away with doing certain things. The laws weren't even that detailed and they weren't that strict. California has changed and has so many more employment laws than the average state does. And now we're at a point where I can Google absolutely anything that I need and start to get an idea. It doesn't mean I can represent myself in court, but it means that I can get an idea that there's something wrong that happened and I can sue you for it. And that is absolutely just not worth it anymore. It was obviously never worth it, but now it's really, really hard when your employees have access to all this information that they could possibly need about being terminated. And it puts you in such a riskier spot before when we couldn't even look into this information and see what was out there. The other parts of this, outside of being an employee, is that we all know that there's a huge healthcare and dental shortage right now. And so, one, if you can avoid firing someone, great, right? We don't want to have to go through that entire process again. Two, it's not just firing an employee. I'm sure you've experienced this either in your current job, maybe it was a previous employer. And have you ever experienced having a colleague terminated before? Have you ever experienced, maybe it was your boss that was fired, and I'm sure you could feel the difference in the office and in the environment that you're in, right? It creates this like level of fear. It creates this level of uncertainty. And that's what you felt at the time when you weren't in a managerial position or you weren't managing employees. And so it can hurt the culture of your practice. And then therefore it hurts the productivity of the other employees. And it also harms trust with other employees. And all of it leads back into this cycle of retention too. You want to keep the employees that you have and you want to keep the good employees that you have. And it's not just firing someone because they're just like really driving you nuts or you know that they're not a good fit for the practice, but it has such a domino effect on the rest of the organization and the rest of your practice, no matter how many employees you have. It makes a huge difference when you decide to cut that relation off with another employee. It's really awkward for you and the employee that's leaving, but it also has effects on everyone else that is left behind and what they have to do next. So always be as cautious as you can when you're wanting to make these decisions and make sure that you understand exactly what you're doing and setting up that employee for success prior to going ahead and letting them go. But I care about this a lot because I know that there's a shortage right now. And so if you can avoid either one, letting go of an employee, or two, you don't want to harm the current employees that you also have as well. And you want to keep maintaining that retention that you have in your practice. Let's wait and see what you need to do instead of immediately just cutting ties with them. So that was some of the jargon and some of what it means and why it's not just firing an employee, right? It's also changing the dynamics and the culture of your practice too when you have to make that really difficult decision. And so I want to go through a couple common mistakes that we see people make when firing employees, because sometimes it's not really egregious, like firing someone in a protected class. It can look a little different. And I'm always someone that learns best through examples as well. So I can take the key terms that I learned and actually apply them and see what they mean in real world scenarios. So mistake number one, saying, well, they were on their probationary period. We were just testing to see if they were going to work out. So it's fine. I can just get rid of them when they aren't adhering to my expectations. It's not your get out of jail free card, unfortunately. Firing a new employee isn't always the safest thing to do. You always want to make sure, when in doubt, give that employee a chance to improve. Give them a chance to learn and grow from any of the mistakes that they're making. If you neglect the probationary period, so let's say you were telling that employee, you have 90 days to show us what you got. You got 90 days to show us how well you're doing, if we want to have you, if we don't want to have you. Obviously, you're going to pick much more better legal jargon than what I just said. But if you choose to change or adjust that probationary period, I can tell I'm going out of focus. Let me see. There we go. If you neglect any of those expectations and promises that you made in said probationary period, that can also get you in trouble. So when in doubt, train your employee. Tell them what they need to fix. Over communicate, not in a passive aggressive way. Over communicate and say, hey, let's work on X, Y, and Z so that way you can perform better. You just have to keep communicating that with them. provide the feedback on where they can improve and tell them what they're doing well, right? Positive reinforcement. So you can keep getting those good behaviors, because I'm sure they're not doing everything bad. Sometimes when you're frustrated, that's all that you see, but make sure you keep providing positive reinforcement for those good behaviors that you really want them to keep repeating. And give them a chance to perform well. Give them some time to work on it, right? It's really hard to change habits. It's really hard to change. Like if they've learned a bad skill somewhere, like give them some time to work on it and get better at it. Mistake number 2, what I brought up earlier, not complying with final pay laws. So make sure whenever, like, this presentation doesn't all have to be when your employee goes out kicking and screaming because you fired them. It does not all have to end in a bad breakup. But unfortunately, let's say it ends so well, and then you mess up on the final pay and you didn't look at what has to come out from state, federal laws. Maybe you had something detailed in your employee handbook that you didn't check either. So make sure we're double checking, and the words that we used at the beginning, so you know exactly when their final day was, when their final working day was, that you had that meeting with them, and make sure you pay them on time. An additional caveat to give you a headache is it also changes whenever an employee has been terminated or they've quit. So there's several variables. Federal, there's different federal laws, then there's state level laws, and then there's if that employee quit or if you fired them. All of those variables change that final pay at the very end of it. And you don't want to mess that up, because those are some really expensive fines to pay. And it's also just such an unnecessary headache too, right? When you wanting to finish that relationship with an employee, whether they resigned or you fired them, you want that to be done, right? And the worst possible thing I could think of for you is an ongoing lawsuit because the final paycheck wasn't paid out correctly, which I'm assuming you also don't mean to do that maliciously. There's also just a lot of variables that you have to think about. So make sure that you are checking all of those different things. Again, that's federal, state level laws are going to change for final pay. And then if an employee quits or you fired them, also changes how they're going to get their final paycheck. So make sure you're checking all of those things before you're doing. Hopefully, oh my God, you have an HR software, so you don't have to deal with all of that. But make sure you're checking all of those things. So mistake number 3, failure to document. If you don't type something out, then it never happened. That doesn't include a Word document either. Maybe that can get you somewhere, but unfortunately, if you're not typing out your notes, if you're not typing them out in a software, which I'll explain to you later, it looks like it never happened. So if you're just writing something down on paper, if you're putting it on a sticky note, let's say you're getting really fancy and you decide to type this up on your notes app on your phone, that is not giving a timestamp. Even with your phone, it's showing that you could edit it, and it's not showing the edits that you made, all of those other things. It's not a compliant piece of software. So when you want to fire an employee, you want to make sure that you've documented that entire process. So like I've said an unholy amount of times, you have to tell and explain to that employee, you have to give them the chance to improve and do better. But where are you going to prove that? You have to prove to the court, if they ever sue you for a wrongful termination claim, you have to be able to prove, hey, I verbally and physically on paper told this employee that they're doing X, Y, and Z wrong. I told them that these are the ways that they can get better. I said it on this date at this time and in this location. And I repeated myself on this day again, and they still weren't listening to me. And then therefore I fired them. That kind of ordeal. So you want to make sure that you document that original warning. You compile the evidence, which is like it says, you should have evidence. You should have evidence showing that they did or did not do what you asked them to do. And then that's when you can start to file a formal violation, and then leading into full separation of employment. And this is just really, really crucial if you are ever in that position to have to go through an employment lawsuit, which you really don't want to have to go through. And we're hoping it never gets to that point. But documentation is so, so important. And even outside of just getting sued, That documentation is phenomenal for whenever you want to go back. Let's say you wrote up an employee for poor performance. Let's say they weren't meeting their quota for whatever they need to do. Let's say for me, I am falling behind on my workload. Let's say I didn't submit uh, 3 social media posts. I'm in marketing. I can't help you with a good dental example. I'm in marketing. So let's say I didn't submit 3 social media posts, right? That's pretty concrete. That's pretty objective. And it shows on our social media accounts, I didn't do my job. So my boss should go in and document that warning that based off of one, my job description, which I'll go over later, not mine specifically, but why you should have a job description. But in my job description that I signed and acknowledged, I said that I was responsible for posting on our social media accounts and maintaining a certain amount of cadence every single week, every month, whatever it might be. If I'm not adhering to that, then my manager has the right to document that and give me, hey, you're not doing your job. Here's what I'm going to do to help you. So maybe my boss says, let's take X, Y, and Z off your plate so that way you can make sure you post on social media because that's part of your job description. So they've compiled the evidence to show I didn't do my job. And now, whenever they want to go back for another performance review, you also have that to reflect on again. So I can't try to tell you, well, maybe I didn't forget to post, or maybe you're wrong about what you had written about me a couple months ago. Having that verbal and especially written warning, but also that written feedback is so great to have. So that way you know when to follow up with me again and you can see steady improvement or decline, which hopefully I'm doing my job and I start posting again. Then you're going to see that formal feedback and that formal process of me getting better or unfortunately maybe worse at my job. We don't know. And so you'll have all of that documented and in one spot in case you ever either need to fire me or in my case, I hope that it leads to a promotion. So then I have the feedback that I need when you tell me like, hey, these are the things you need to do to get promoted around here. Now that's documented and shown to me as an employee. Here's what I can do to be better, and here's how I can get those rewards for doing so. Now, mistake number 4, converting a resignation into a termination. That sounds so fun, doesn't it? I was thinking of how to say this in like the most fancy way. Just consider not doing it. It can lead you into so many bad situations if you take an employee that has decided to resign and you're like, no, I think I'd rather just fire you instead. That is such a bad idea if you don't have the right reasons for doing so. It is so much safer for you to allow them to work through their notice period or ask them to stay at home and you can pay them out for said notice period and ensuring the nature of that separation stays as a resignation. If they resign and maybe you're just feeling like really awkward about it, right? Like that is really uncomfortable if an employee resigns. You have to deal with them at the office still, right? And you're like, maybe it'd be easier if I just said you're fired. It's not though. Unless you have a really, really good reason, like they have violated a policy in the handbook, they have violated code of conduct, they have engaged in just poor behavior. Obviously, like there's a time when you should negate their resignation, but 9 times out of 10, let them follow through on their notice period, get through being uncomfortable, and leave it as it is. That way you're not setting yourself up to be in a really bad position. The reason why, and one potential problem that can come with this is, let's say I decide to quit, and one of those really fun words that we talked about at the beginning was retaliation. What if I think you're retaliating against me? What if I think you're upset that I decided to quit and I'm like, this person is retaliating against me because I decided to quit my job? It could look bad if you're not demonstrating exactly why you decided to have me fired once I had already submitted my resignation. So just my 2 cents. I couldn't think of a fancier way to say it. Just consider not doing it. Just if you really don't need to, consider not doing it. And then I've talked about this a little bit ad nauseum. If you decide to fire someone of a protected group, people are protected for a reason. It's not to make your life more difficult. It's not to add a whole bunch of extra rules to make your life worse, to give you an extra headache. There's protected classes for a reason because historically, people in those protected classes have not been treated fairly. And so that's when the government decides to step in and say, okay, we need to add an extra layer of protection, right? Because usually when you see rules at an amusement park and they seem crazy to you, someone had to ruin it for the rest of them and make the amusement park not fun anymore. Someone was behaving poorly and not treating people fairly. So the government said, okay, we're going to have to teach grown adults how to treat each other nicely. And now we have a list of protected classes. And so you want to make sure that doesn't mean that you're outwardly trying to be discriminatory towards someone. It doesn't have to be so blatant all the time, and you're probably not meaning it that way. But you want to make sure that one of the first thoughts that you have when you want to terminate someone is think to yourself, is this person a member of a protected class? If so, make sure that your reasons for termination do not include any pieces of themselves that fall into a protected class. And this is where a job description is so important, because when you have those listed out, so you see in this little cute, adorable square on the left, it has my job description. So that's what I'm described to do, my qualifications, and then below that, it'll say what my responsibilities are. So you want to make sure you're evaluating that employee based off of an agreement they signed, a job description they signed, knowing that that's what they were required to do for their position. So that way, you know, you're being really careful and you're truly evaluating that employee separation based off of performance, any other policy violation, whatever it might be. Just make sure it's not happening to someone of a protected class, and that's not the reason that you are wanting to terminate them. And again, that's not to say that that's like your main reason to do it, or you're just being mean and you want to behave this way, or you want to be overtly biased against someone. But you have to be very aware that those are people that are part of protected classes and who have been discriminated and hurt in the past. And so we take an extra step to make sure that everyone is being treated fairly. So that means you establish clear, very crystal clear job duties and essential functions for their job in that job description and when they've been posted. And that can be part of your interview process too, right? So when you're asking them, hey, can you do X, Y, and Z? Yes. So they're saying they can do those things. Make sure that you are following the process for any accommodations that they need. So we've talked about, not today, and I won't go off to another tangent, but with the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, that came with other accommodations that we need to offer pregnant women, right? That came with other things that we need to adhere to, because common sense is just not common. So we have to make sure that we're providing appropriate and helpful accommodations for women that are pregnant in the workplace. And so you have to follow all of those accommodations and make sure that you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing as an employer. And then the last part is, don't terminate or discipline an employee for taking a protected leave of absence or informing you of a disability. So that's another added layer to be really careful of when you are wanting to either discipline, reprimand, or terminate an employee and they disclose to you that they do have a disability or they are part of that protected class, or they're taking a leave. So if an employee needs to go on maternity leave, sick leave, FMLA, all of those really fun words that you need to remember, you have to make sure that you're not disciplining them for taking a leave that they're owed, which I mentioned at the beginning, that part of, let me just go back and show you. That is kind of what this means, that employees are getting. I was trying to find it. It was definitely here. Oh, when an employee is fired because they are a member of a protected class or they exercised a right the law gave them. The law is giving them the right to those accommodations. You cannot, should not be firing or disciplining them for a law that was given to them. That's their right, is to take that leave. That is their right to use those accommodations. that's when that becomes wrongful termination or wrongful discipline, whenever you decide to take that away from them, or you decide you want to punish them for using what the law gave them. To go back to that. And then over communicating. I have a problem doing this, not in terminations, because I haven't had to deal with that. Over communicating in the sense, I talk when I'm nervous. So even today, I'm making sure that I don't like word vomit and I don't talk too fast. But I'm bringing this up because this is so important. If you have nothing nice to say, and if you have nothing objective to say in that termination meeting, consider not saying it. If you over communicate, and you can get yourself into a really bad territory when you're in those situations, which might sound like, Taylor, duh, I'm not going to say anything stupid while I'm trying to fire an employee. But when you're in those situations where it's really uncomfortable, it's like going through a breakup, right? You've been working with this person for upwards of 8 hours a day, weeks, months, years at a time. It's going to be really uncomfortable and awkward. And so be mindful before going into this conversation that you're going to feel really emotional, not in the sense that like emotional, you're going to cry or like feel so many feelings. You're just going to feel a little bit anxious or like awkward, right? Because it's an awkward situation to be in. It kind of sucks. And so you want to make sure that you're not overly communicating and saying things that could be used against you later, which again, I don't think you're trying to be a mean person, but sometimes those awkward situations can make you say things that you really don't mean to say. So if you're terminating an employee for poor performance, you would say this employee did not meet the performance expectations of the practice. Let's say this employee, you're wanting to terminate them because they're being aggressive and they're having outbursts in the practice. The reason you give them, they're engaging in employee misconduct, part of your policy that was written in your employee handbook. Let's say you're terminating because you no longer need that position anymore. So you say, due to the business needs of our practice, the position of itself is being eliminated. We are no longer hiring for this position anymore. We are not going to rehire for this position anymore, and that's why we're eliminating this. So make sure you keep it short, sweet, subjective, keep it to the point, and don't interrogate them either. This is one of those things where you really want to rehearse, whether it be with yourself or the practice owner or your manager as well, and make sure that when you are having these really difficult conversations, you don't overdo it and say things that you probably shouldn't be saying out of that sheer anxiety, right, of having that really uncomfortable conversation. So the last part, obviously, why? What does HR for Health have to do with all of this, right? Like, what does an HR software have to do with firing an employee? Why does it matter? Am I just trying to sell you something? No, spoiler, I'm not trying to just sell you something. So before your eyes glaze over this part of it, right? Because I don't want this to sound sales pitchy, because it's not. It's really important to have HR software and technology in these moments. I want to keep this to the very top level of what we have to offer, and specifically what features you look for in an HR software to make sure that you're compliant and safe. So keep in mind, this will just be a generalization. And this is for this presentation in general, right? I can't answer all of your specific questions when terminating an employee. And I can't answer all your specific questions when it comes to like, what feature should I use in this situation, in this situation? This will just be a generalization of some of those things. And so we're going to kind of walk through some of those features that we have. And then I'm also going to be honest and say, these are the things that you should look for in HR technology if you are shopping around and looking to have a more effective way to manage your practice. Because realistically, would I prefer that you get HR for Health? Obviously. But I would also prefer that you not get sued. So with that, I'm still going to tell you which features you should probably be looking for. First one, my favorite one, is the employee handbook. Everywhere, every job, every organization needs to have an employee handbook, because adults do not know how to act right without being told how to act. You have to have this employee handbook at the very beginning of employment and telling them exactly what rules they need to follow and how to behave in your practice. This is like the best thing ever to keep you compliant, to keep you safe, because this is the thing that employees are signing at the very beginning of employment. And so this is the thing that you can fall back on when they aren't, when their performance starts to drop. This includes attendance, this includes holiday, this includes pay, this includes time off, this includes all of it in this beautiful handbook that, let's be honest, not everyone's reading word for word, but it still counts when they sign it, that they've acknowledged that I've seen this employee handbook. I know these are the rules that I'm supposed to follow. Most important feature, most important thing for you to have, first of all. Second of all, should be digital. They should be signing it digitally so I can see where, when, and how they acknowledge this agreement with you and your practice. So having this digitized and with an e-signature is incredibly important for one. Two, I gotta say it's kind of nice just to have it in one spot, have it in your software so that way I often look at our employee handbook when I want to see what days off I have. So I want to look up what holidays are mandated that I get to have off. One of them at HR for Health being my birthday. I got to look that back up in our employee handbook and see I'm off on my birthday and I'm going to make sure that I take that day off. It's helpful to have that employee handbook where I'm able to access it as an employee. And it's helpful for you to have it as an employer. And the last part of that, not to brag, but what makes us super cool is that we auto update said employee handbook whenever we get new employment laws on a federal and state level. Second super cool thing is that we're also going to tell you which ones and how to update them. So we're able to see, based off of all of our clients and in the healthcare and dental industry, we can give you recommendations on how to enforce and how to utilize a new policy that's come into practice. So that's another really cool thing. And that's why it matters to have an HR software that is specific towards healthcare and dental, because we can give you specialized recommendations for your practice in that regard. Second thing, new hire checklist. Oh my God, there's so many forms you have to fill out as a new employee, right? On a federal and state level. And then if you have anything specific towards your practice, there's so many forms that you need to fill out. So this is all part of that process too, and making sure that you've documented and that employee knows exactly what they're supposed to be adhering to and what laws they're supposed to be following. The great part with HR for Health is one, it's all in this tab of the new hire checklist for one. Two, we can tell you what we recommend you send out to employees versus what's mandatory, what you don't really need, but what's a good thing to have. And then all of this is digital signatures as well. So it's all in one spot and you get to see when that employee signed that and that they acknowledged it. So if it's one of those things where I want to come back and say I never saw it, but if I signed it, I can't really dispute that, right? Performance reviews. So kind of like we had mentioned, I'm talking to myself, kind of like I had mentioned earlier, making sure you give that employee ample amount of time to improve their performance. Using a software that has a performance review feature is game changer, right? Because one, again, not to toot the horn of HR for Health, we have templates. So if you want to just start with a template, that's a great way to put yourself, because I understand it's super overwhelming to figure out what to evaluate your employees on. Maybe you're just really burnt out and you can't think of what to evaluate them on right now, right? So you have some templates that you can pick from. And then within that performance review feature, you are documenting it, like we made sure is really important. Two, it's time stamped, so it's in there. And then three, it's in a vault. It's not moving anywhere. You can't lose it. It is in the software. You can make sure to reference it each time. So this is incredibly important for when they're being evaluated on that performance. And let's say you want to go back later and discuss it with them and say, hey, you have improved or you haven't improved based off of this feedback that I gave you X amount of days or months ago. So having that performance review feature is really, really important. And then you can also send off those performance reviews for signatures as well. So that's the employee saying, I acknowledge that I got this performance review. I acknowledge what you said to me, and I'm acknowledging that I heard you and I know what you said, so that way they can't come back later and say, but you never told me that. No, they acknowledged it. They signed it. They said, I saw your feedback towards me, and I see the ways that you told me I could improve. And if I don't improve, that could result in disciplinary action. Having those e-signatures and a place to store all of those performance reviews is really, really important. And almost done, I promise. I'm not keeping you forever. Having a notes feature that's separate towards performance reviews. So let's say you just need to jot something down and you just want to make a note of something that's not in a formal performance review. Adding notes on an employee that are confidential is extremely important. And adding in some violations. So different from performance review, right? They're in direct violation of the employee handbook. Let's say they showed up late X amount of times. Maybe they just showed up late once. Whatever it might be, this one, for example, in attendance, you want to make sure that with that violation, you've documented it, right? I've used that word. Please don't turn that into a drinking game of how many times if I said documented. You've documented what they did. So you put down in a portal somewhere that's time stamped and electronic, you were late on X day at X time. That's in violation of our attendance policy, right? So you put that down and then you send it out to that employee and they have to sign it and acknowledge, I was late. I did do that. And I see why it went wrong. So if it comes up later in some sort of termination process, it's been documented that, hey, you were showing up late like all the time. And I have it documented here and you signed on it saying that you knew you were showing up late to work and you've acknowledged it. So we're almost wrapping up today. This is like your quick little cheat sheet of what you need to do prior to a termination, because most of the legwork is happening before you even get to that meeting. Make sure you have a process for documentation or overall just a process for termination. You never want to have this come across as favoritism or a bias. How you treat one employee is how you should be treating all the other employees. 2, know your state's laws for final pay. Run that conversation into the ground. We talked about that. Know your state's final paperwork requirements. Make sure you have an employee handbook. Make sure you also have very clearly defined job descriptions so your employee knows what they're responsible for doing. And then make sure you train your managers how to coach those employees, right? Because that's like the big part of the conversation today is just make sure you continue to train them and teach them how to do better because they didn't know before. And now you're going to train them and they're going to learn. Or unfortunately, maybe they won't learn and that'll really suck. But you're going to tell them anyways and hopefully train them to do better so that way you don't have to fire them because firing them is like the worst case scenario to have to get to. So I've yapped for 50 minutes straight about terminations, and I hope I made it less overwhelming and less stressful to have that conversation. And I hope I made it make sense as to like, why does HR for Health even exist? Why are we pushing our software? Why did we even create a software, right? Like there's other HR softwares out there to use, but like, why did HR for Health think, let's also get into the industry? Because there's no other software that's specifically built for HR, for healthcare and dental practices. We built this software so that way, one, you can reach out to our HR advisors who are trained and are certified to help you not only in HR, but also in healthcare and dental to make sure that they can handle your specific scenarios. And we really wanted to make it easy too and have all the features that you need quickly accessible. So with that, I hope I did not give you a migraine today. I want to leave a couple of minutes for you to ask me some questions. Spoiler, I'm never going to give you an answer to a question that I don't know. So if I don't know, I'm not going to tell you some answer I'm making up in my head. So you can leave them in the chat. And if I don't know that specific answer, I'm going to put you in contact with someone that can answer your question. Because that would be really terrible if I just pulled it out of thin air and I couldn't help you and I gave you terrible, terrible information or advice. But if you don't feel comfortable asking in the chat, you can email us, hello@hrforhealth.com. You can go to our website and also fill out our contact us form if you're not able to remember this email. But once I wrap up today, I'm going to do my marketing girl duties and upload this. and make sure that you have a copy of this webinar today. I'm going to send you over our slide deck, and I'm going to give you a termination checklist as well to make this a little bit easier of, hey, you want to fire someone, where do you even start, right? Because it's really, really overwhelming. And I know someone in here has definitely Googled late at night, how do I fire my employee? And it was probably really stressful. So I'm not seeing any questions in here. Either that means I put a lot of people to sleep or I answered all of your questions while I was talking. So if anything comes up, please, please, please feel free to reach out. There's real people behind HR for Health, and we really do want to help you. Email us at hello@hrforhealth.com. You can email me. I am very responsive. tdanko@hrforhealth.com. And if you have any feedback for me today too, as well, I welcome it. So I hope you have a beautiful rest of Thursday. And how do I get a copy of the termination checklist? I'm going to email it to you directly, right? That would be such a pain if I sent you to another link. I'm going to email all of you because you registered for this today. I have all of your emails, not to be creepy, but I have it all. So I'm going to send it to you so that way you have a copy. And if you have any additional questions, you can reply to that email today. So have a great Thursday. I hope you're off this weekend. If not, I'm so sorry. I hope you get some days off soon. And I look forward to talking with you all in the future if you want to reach out to us. Thank you all, and I look forward to talking to you soon.